Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And it is time to get the 2032 2033 offseason started in earnest. Free agency filings were today. Appreciate the thoughts that some of you have given recently over what we should do in this offseason. Totally agree that helping our offense and getting as big a bat as we can realistically bring on is the right path and would help us fill the biggest hole that we have. Do appreciate the thoughts from Fake Name in that the trade market rather than the free agent market may be the way to go. We're definitely continuing to explore that option. And also appreciate Stanley Rosella opining about our flirtation at the end of last episode with MJ Melendez, and just to be sure that that is something that we really want to do. And I'm not confident that it is. And we're also, since we just hired a new scout within the last few weeks, don't have great scouting accuracy on a lot of these guys yet. You can see we've got a lot of scouting assignments in place. So I think I am going to try to take the patient route and let things develop a bit. Michael Harris III would be a huge add, but don't love that he's fragile and don't love that basically he would cost us all of our money, and he's probably going to be looking for 6 years as a minimum. He's asking for 8. Colton Sims, we had tried to get to a 4-year contract from the 8 that he was asking for, and we can kind of get there if we put in a lot of player options and a no trade clause and about $39 million a year. So that's not really what we're looking for either. Jason Dominguez, like Michael Harris II, is a very good defensive center fielder, but he's also fragile and he's not as good offensively. Melendez, I've talked about. I think he would be a rich man's version of Samuel Basallo, who we've had for the past few years, with a better personality, better catcher ability if we did play him behind the plate, and a better bat. But I don't know if it's an $18 million bat, particularly now that he's 34 years old. Brett Beatty, a guy that we flirted with last offseason, is a guy that we will still flirt with this offseason, but don't feel like we need to do anything immediately with them. And I have been doing tons of searches, kind of trying to find basically just an above average hitter to go after. And you can see we're basically just looking for someone who's above average in contact power and eye, who can play some level of defense at whatever position they're at. Harris and Sims, the free agents, make the list, along with Jordan Westberg, who looking for about $15 million right now, is another guy maybe we think about down the line, but I don't think we chase after him right now. And then there's a lot of guys making huge money. Guerrero has a no trade that he will only drop for Toronto right now. Devers has a no trade. He won't come and join us. Obviously, those things can change as the season moves along, and certainly a big bat in the final year of its contract may be an interesting opportunity for us to pursue further down the line, meaning when we get into next regular season and perhaps teams get a little more desperate. But we have looked at a lot of these guys and tried to put trade offers together for many of the better hitters that are available. And given the money that some of these guys are making, or the money that some of these guys aren't making, in the case of some of the excellent young guys, the requests from the other teams have just generally not been reasonable. But again, we are 1 day into free agency. We're not even a full day into free agency. So there's plenty of time for us to make deals as this off-season proceeds. I do want to make sure that we spend some of this money, one, to put the best team possible on the field, but two, also to ensure that when we get close to the preseason starting, that we don't have $35 million out there in ownership as well. You didn't spend it, so we're going to claw a bunch of that back, which does happen from time to time. I think because I do happen to be playing in commish mode the day before we go to the preseason starting, I could just put a bunch in scouting, development, and the draft budget for a day and then move it out. So hopefully that won't be an issue. But the goal is to ensure that we've got access to all of this money for our purposes next season, whether it's signing free agents now, picking up players in trade as we get closer to the 2023 trade deadline, signing a lot of expensive players out of the amateur draft next summer. There's plenty of things that we'll be able to do with that money, and we want to ensure that we have as much of it as possible available. We have, as you can see, bumped up scouting and development a bit from where they were last year also, and still have a lot of potential money to spend. But I think right now we are going to be patient. We've got some guys that we are scouting to hopefully get a little bit better knowledge on. And sadly, that does include major leaguers at this point. But I don't think there's a player out there where if we happen to miss out on him because we're not making an offer in these first couple of weeks of free agency, there's just nobody that strikes me as a must-have for the money that they're looking for or for what their team is looking for in return for them in trade. So with that said, we're going to get the offseason rolling and just try to be as patient as possible, and also build up some scouting knowledge on a lot of these players that we lost when our previous scout retired. And we haven't even made it to the winter meetings yet, and the top guys are all off the market, so it's been a pretty active free agent market. We'll take a look at what those guys ended up going for. And Michael Harris II signed with the Blue Jays for about $35 million a year. Actually, yeah, obviously various amounts, but it's a 6-year contract with the 6th year having a vesting option in it. So went for a little less than he anticipated or that he was looking for, but for someone who's already in his 30s, who's injury prone, I just wasn't going to go there. It looked like Jason Dominguez got about exactly what he was looking for at around $25 million a year over 4 years, with some player optionality. And then last but not least, Colton Sims signed with the Dodgers. The amount there actually pretty reasonable, only $20 million, but it was more the structure that he was looking for. And obviously, you know, that kind of money we would have taken him. He was saying he wanted a contract with that structure when we were trying to get him down to 4 years, and he said he wanted $39 million a year from us to sign with us. So obviously could have investigated it a little bit more and a little bit more actively, but I didn't love any of the options. Colton Sims at that money, if we could have gotten him there, would have been interesting. But again, when I was talking to him about that type of deal, he said he wanted $39 million a year for those 4 years, and it was only a couple of weeks ago. So clearly he was perhaps not really all that enthusiastic about joining Buffalo, although I did note that with the no trade clause, we are one of the teams that he would consider going to. So maybe we'll have an option to pick him up at some point down the line. The trade block is starting to have a few more interesting players added to it. Ronald Acuna Jr., Joel Nelson. I don't think either of them is actually the right fit for us. Pitcher-wise, if there was a big top starter, we would certainly be interested, but nobody like that on the trade block at this point. And you can see our scouting accuracy is still not great with a lot of these people. So have not made much progress at all yet this postseason. Melendez and Beatty still out there. Obviously, there's an opportunity for us to try to do something in a trade as well. But quiet start to the off season when we're going to have a lot of money to spend. And with Brett Beatty off the market now too, I am going to at least investigate something with MJ Melendez. Think that he could still be a pretty productive hitter against right-handed pitching. I don't love him, and I don't want to make a long-term commitment to him. Says he's looking for 4 years with an average of $16.4 million with a vesting option for the final season and a no-trade clause. Says he's also got an offer from Chicago, so that means there's a little competition already, unfortunately. I don't think I'm going to offer him near that kind of money or near those kind of options that work in his favor. But we'll see if maybe we can bring him on board to give us at least a solid bat for DH for this upcoming year, who could fill in at catcher if we did happen to have some unfortunate injuries to Rutschman. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we can't get anything going here with Melendez unless we basically guarantee him 4 years and include a no-trade clause, which at his age and with his ability, just not a path that we are willing to go down right now. So in what has been a very quiet and boring off-season for us so far, we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. We are going to be picking second to last ahead of only the Angels. Typically, we've had pretty good luck finding relievers, young outfielders over the years of this playthrough who have been able to help our team. Don't have any huge holes in the pitching staff right now, but certainly can't hurt to bring on an extra player or two to potentially be in camp with us. So hopefully there will be some interesting opportunities when we find out who's available for our pick. And we did lose Jordan Wicks and Mike Soraka, two veterans who were part of our organization. We signed them as minor league free agents. Wicks was in AAA Albany, 33-year-old. Soraka, 35 years old, was also in AAA Albany for us last year. We weren't going to protect either of those guys, veterans. So if the looks like if the Yankees and the Cubs can make good use of them, more power to them. And I think we've found our first target. We'll see what our scouting director recommends. He doesn't think we should take anyone. We are going to make a pick here. It's Jaden Hilaire, a 24-year-old out of the Expos organization. We actually happen to have very high scouting accuracy on him, which is rare. Certainly looks like he could be a useful bullpen arm and a guy who could start in a pinch. He's 24 years old and he's fragile already in terms of his injury proneness, so probably not someone we're going to be looking to build around for the long term, but his profile is not really that dissimilar from the two guys that we just lost. I'd argue it might be a little bit better, and he's also, about a decade younger than either of those guys. So Hilaire is a guy that we won't mind bringing into camp. We will go ahead and draft him in the first round of this Rule 5 draft, and I've got a player that we're targeting for the second round as well. Hopefully he will still be around. We lost another player, Zach Neto, to the Mets. Actually, it might have been the Mets who took the player from us in the first round rather than the Yankees. I just saw New York. Another guy who we signed as a minor league free agent last year. Didn't want to bother putting him on the 40-man roster and guaranteeing him a major league contract. Brooks Lee, another guy with a similar profile that we have had in our minor league system last year, really at the lowest levels of the organization. Don't know if any of these guys will end up making the teams that picked them, but it's basically just organizational depth that we weren't going to put on our 40-man roster. Our scouting director recommends nothing here in the second round, but we are a bit intrigued by the young catcher Andres Valenzuela. 22-year-old out of the Dominican, not great defensively, but looks like for a catcher he could have an interesting bat. He's not even 23 years old yet, and he only made it to Double A last year, where he did hit 321 after hitting 349 in high A ball. We don't have great scouting accuracy on him. I think it's a long shot that he will end up being our backup catcher out of spring training, but he's another guy that we can easily throw into the mix. So we will go ahead and draft Valenzuela as well. And looks like we continued having the farm system that we've built up with a lot of veteran players. Also lost Brendan Donovan and Yanni Hernandez. Oh, God, the fan interest metric in this game is ridiculous. You know, Yanni Hernandez is a guy who we had in rookie ball last year at 34 years of age. And the fans, they're devastated that Yanni Hernandez is gone. Fortunately, our fan interest was high enough that it's still 100 plus. I would think once Ohtani signs with somebody that could take a significant hit. But it seems like every year I complain, and I was just commenting in a reply to a comment that I don't think I complain too much about bad luck in this game or things that go our way or don't go our way. But one thing I will acknowledge I complain about regularly is the fan interest mechanism, which is just so primitive and unsophisticated. You would think in 2023, a game that is in its 24th iteration would have a little more nuance in something that's so important in terms of driving how much money these teams actually generate in terms of attendance and people coming through the turnstiles and how much people are actually willing to pay for tickets. And there is my annual, or actually much more frequent than annual, rant about the fan interest metric. So we ended up losing 6 players, 3 to the Mets, 1 to the Cubs, and 2 to the Marlins. We added the 2 players ourselves, the catcher Valenzuela and the reliever Jaden Hilaire. So we'll see what those guys look like in camp. And the off-season continues. And MJ Melendez is now off the market. Looks like he got 4 years, $60 million, with his option as to whether or not that's a 4-year contract. And he also got some of the incentives he was looking for as well. So most of our free agent targets that we thought we'd potentially go after are gone. Perhaps not surprisingly, Ohtani, who's going to miss all year, is still on the market. So it's going to definitely be time to turn our attention to the trade market and see. I'm going to keep beating the bushes on potential trades and see if there's something that we can figure out to bring some talent and some salary back onto our team. And we've made it to January 1st. Still basically haven't spent any of the money that we have. You can see no free agent signings at all this year. Are getting to the point where over the next 6 to 8 weeks, there can probably be some interesting bargains that emerge. A couple of our former pitchers, Cade Smith and Caleb Ferguson, kind of on our radar as guys to consider potentially bringing in to help our bullpen. Batter-wise, there's still a few guys out there. Akamaya and Butler would both kind of be options. Austin Wells, it's hard to imagine bringing him back after the rough year he had for us last year, but as a left-handed hitter with some pop, he does fit the profile a little bit. Sadly, I guess I could say the same thing about Samuel Basalo at this point, too. I think Jordan Westberg may be the most realistic guy for us to consider bringing back. Nick York is another guy that we could potentially reunite with. So don't love any of these options, but I'm going to continue to work pretty hard on the trade market offline and see if maybe I can put anything together that looks interesting. Still not a ton on the trading block, familiar names. We're scouting out a few of them now. We'll see whether anything materializes with any of these players, or more likely we'll still try to track down somebody who's not actually on the trade block. But we obviously want to do something this offseason, certainly need to do something this offseason, but also not just going to spend money for the sake of it if we don't really kind of like the value that we're getting, the player that we're getting, and the duration of the contract that we need to put out there. Because going into the season with a ton of money to spend won't be the worst thing in the world if we get to a point where some teams are looking to really dump some salaries as we get closer to the trade deadline. So since we haven't had a lot to really talk about and ask for your thoughts on this episode, we'll finish off with the international training. And it was another disrupted international amateur free agent season for us, because the first camp in October was when Rick Hahn was still our scout, and the last three have been with Yoel Arujo. So we'll take a look at the guys that we ran through our final camp here. David Nino, among the starting pitchers, certainly seems to be the class of the field. Almost 17 years old, extreme ground ball tendencies, fastball, sinker, and splitter all look like they could be well above average major league pitches. Potentially really interesting stuff in movement and even control that's well above average. So he clearly seems to be the top starting pitching prospect. Juan Landero is a guy who could be a decent starter if he develops perfectly from here. David Guerra is a guy who we like his personality with the high leadership and work ethic. Question, unless we get some talent change randomness going forward, whether he's really going to ever be a major leaguer, even if he fully develops. And then Juan Pacheco is a guy who, another guy we really like his personality, potentially as a 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. Looks like he could be a borderline starter if everything developed perfectly. But Nino, to me, is certainly the most interesting of the pitching prospects, and he's also someone that we have a strong relationship with. So that would be one path to consider. But there's actually some more well-balanced everyday players in this international amateur free agent class than we've seen in some recently. Nelson Hueso is at least respectable defensively, has a little speed, and potentially off the charts or at the off of the charts contact and home run power. So certainly an interesting hitting prospect for Hueso. Not surprisingly, league interest in him very high. Juan Jaimes, another guy who has a very impressive batting profile. He's got some durability, like the high work ethic, and guy who can at least be a competent corner outfielder or a competent first baseman. Could probably play third in a pinch if you were very desperate, but really more of a first base, left field, right field DH. But like the potential bat, like the work ethic, like the durability. So Jaimes is a pretty interesting prospect as well. Not surprisingly, league interest in him also expected to be very high. Jesus Rivera, a center fielder, pretty good fielder, another guy with high work ethic, has a little bit of speed, and another guy who, if he completely develops, I think his bat could be pretty interesting. Jesus Tamayo, another guy, center fielder, another guy with high work ethic. Bat probably top line not as impressive as some of the others we've looked at. Has enough range to play anywhere you'd like him to in the outfield. Probably a natural corner outfielder for a good team. But we've seen in international amateur free agency over the past several years a lot of very one-dimensional bats with no speed, no ability to play defense, really their first baseman slash DHs. And all four of these outfielders are at least interesting to think about. There's also the second baseman, David Cisneros. Not a brilliant looking prospect, more of a potential filler if things don't work through with others. For $2 million, probably not a direction that we'd go. And then David Medina, a catcher. And we've got bad luck with catchers with the last name of Medina that we've picked in international amateur free agency. He does not look as impressive a prospect as Andres Medina did many years ago, but still a guy who could have a plus catcher ability and a little bit of pop in his bat. And he's also not looking for all that much money. So to me, I think this is a year to go after a higher end player, and it's really a question of, do we go after Nino or do we go after one of the four big outfielders? Medina, to me, is a fallback or a supplemental guy if we don't have to spend full amount on anyone else that we go after. Nino would certainly be the pitcher that I would lean towards. I'll check out these batters just one more time to maybe work through my thoughts on them. Jesus Tamayo, I think, is probably a step below most of these guys. I would certainly take Jesus Rivera over him with a better defense, a little more speed, and that contact and gap power with that speed is a pretty nice combination. He still potentially has some pop in the bat. So to me, Rivera's also not, at least right now, looking for crazy money, and we've also got a very strong relationship with him. The two right fielders, Nelson Hueso, certainly love that contact and home run power combination. Competent corner outfielder. He can bunt. He's got some speed. But Juan James, again, I'm just going to make up these names. Not quite as good defensively, not as much speed, but the high end of that bat is very impressive. The durability is pretty attractive as well. To me, I kind of think it's Nino, James, or Rivera would be the first three guys that I right now think I'm planning on targeting. Obviously, there are a lot more players in this international amateur free agent class that I'll be spending some time with over the next couple of weeks and next couple of weeks of game time and not real time. And, if we see somebody interesting there to talk about, the other three-star pitcher that we didn't bring into camp was Juan Contreras. Just not impressed with his potential stuff. Like that he's durable, doesn't throw all that hard compared to a lot of his peers. And then among the batters, I think we got the top guys in. Yeah, we brought the top four, at least in terms of our scouts' upside ratings, into camp. Sterling Fidge was a 16-year-old Australian. The batting profile is just so weak compared to some of those other players that we looked at that even with the high work ethic, unless you get a lot of luck and unexpected development with him, he just can't compete with these other guys, and he's not really looking for all that less money than the two guys that we like, James and Rivera. He's the same, and Rivera's lower. Ignacio Zavala, second baseman. he was more borderline interesting, like the durability. Doesn't really have a position. He's a first baseman or a corner outfielder, but he's not as good as a lot of the other corner outfielders that we've looked at. And I don't think the bat is quite as good, a little less speed than some of them. So I think I kind of was bringing a lot of the right guys into the final camp at this point. But if you've got thoughts on the direction we should go, would love to hear them. Right now, as I said, James Rivera and Nino are the three guys that I am at this point most strongly considering pursuing an international amateur free agency this year. So we will tackle that in our next episode, and we're also going to hopefully in that episode tackle bringing somebody on board this off season, because we've got a lot of money still to potentially spend. We've been very responsible and haven't chased good money after bad quite yet. There are some options out there that are okay in the free agent market that we may take up in the coming weeks, particularly if the prices come down. But I think I just need to continue grinding and being creative and try to come up with something in the trade market that will give us the bat we need to really bolster our offense next season. And we'll find out how we do on that front. We'll find out how we do in regular free agency, and we'll find out how we do in international amateur free agency in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.